Good evening. My name is David Posner. I'm the Events Secretary for the Sussex branch of the IET, and I'd like to welcome you to this evening's webinar. First of all, a few acknowledgements. Thank you to Greg Hobbs for actually organising this session, and to Asley, who's backing me up in case my internet connection goes down. Right, today's session. I'm very pleased to introduce Paul Nichols. Paul is Parking Strategy and Controls Manager for Brighton and Hove City Council. I will let Paul introduce himself once he starts his talk.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you today about becoming a net zero carbon council and the challenges that presents in terms of developing an electric vehicle charging infrastructure. I thought I'd start my talk today with a slide of a typical street in Brighton and Hove, one with, at the moment, currently lots of petrol and diesel vehicles. It's a street with no off-street parking, as most streets in Brighton and Hove are. And I wanted to talk to you about particularly the challenge for those over the next few years. Every driver of those vehicles is going to think potentially about buying an electric vehicle. And whether they do or not will largely depend on whether there's a good, reliable public charging infrastructure and network for them to do so. So first of all, I thought I'd start with an introduction. I'm Paul Nichols, Parking Strategy and Contracts Manager. I did a French degree initially and immediately moved to the south of France, where I worked at the campsite reception. And my first vehicle was an electric one. It's the Golf buggy that you can see here, or a slightly larger version of that. And it was used to go from the campsite reception to take holidaymakers to their static caravan, carrying their luggage backwards and forwards, changing gas bottles. It really was the workhorse of the campsite, and it worked perfectly. It was really positive experience at the end of the day. We'd work constantly from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and we'd charge in at night, plug it in, and then after 11 hours it was ready to do the same again without having to go elsewhere to refuel or anything. It was constantly used. So yeah, a very, very good, positive first experience of using an electric vehicle. When I came back to the UK, I got off at Victoria Station and I went for my first job, which was notice processing officer, which I didn't really know quite what that meant, but it turned out it was parking. And after 10 years, I became notice processing manager at Westminster City Council, and then decided to give up the commute and moved to Brighton and Hove City Council, where I've dealt with lots of different projects over the years, including the introduction of phone parking, which is now used by 70% of people in the city when they put to pay for their parking. I've also dealt with pay and display machine infrastructure and the conversion to card payments rather than cash. And more recently, the city's ultra low emission zone, which was trying to tackle an issue with high levels of pollution along the High Street in Brighton and Hove, North Street and Western Road, which is heavily used by 96 bus movements go through that area. And it was to try to set higher standards for bus company emissions, retrofit the buses to improve air quality in that particular area. And now we have hybrid buses that automatically switch to electric as they enter the ultra low emission zone. But now, and what I'd like to talk about today is the team that we've got behind me, who are absolutely fantastic, lots of different skill sets, and they've been working on the last 3 or 4 years on developing our electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Already we get about 300 emails per month on our electric vehicles at brighton-hove.gov.uk email address on a range of different topics, some of which we're going to talk about later today. It's involved project management, contract management, procurement, and a big part of the work we do is consulting with people on a large scale, as well as individual streets when we're changing a bay to electric vehicles only, and CAD drawings for signs and lines, etc. So today I'd like to talk firstly about the Council's net carbon neutral ambitions, where electric vehicles fit into those ambitions, and talk about our journey so far in developing a public charging infrastructure. Brighton and Hove at the moment, we've got over 200 lamppost chargers. By the end of the year, we should have about 250. We have around 58 fast chargers. By the end of the year, we hope that to increase that to about 100. And we also have 3 rapid charging hubs, and by the end of the year, we hope to have a 4th. So we talk about some of the challenges in developing that charging network, some of which we've only started to consider over the last year, and then finally talk about our future plans for developing the charging network. And then the most interesting part for me is the Q&A. I look forward to your questions and comments on this talk, and your feedback on the charging infrastructures in general. So to begin with, Brighton and Hove declared a climate emergency in December 2018. And then since that declaration, council officers have been working on developing a carbon neutral programme, which is all online if anyone wants to look it up. I would say that this is one area I've dealt with lots of different projects along over the years, but this is really one where there is 100% political support for achieving an ambitious target of lots of different councils have set different targets, but in our case, it's to become net carbon neutral by 2030. A big part of that is consulting with residents, and we have a 2020 set up a citizens assembly and a youth assembly on travel and transport, and every single service, all 700 services across the council, have been involved in some shape or other in tackling the climate emergency. So where are we now? This is for Brighton and Hove, and it shows the carbon reduction pathway to 2050. As you can see, national policies have a big impact on that. In terms of electricity, the decarbonisation of the grid has had a big part to play in reducing our carbon emissions. There's been less progress to date on in terms of gas, which is largely home heating, and the same is true of transport. Unfortunately, in terms of surface transport, relatively little progress has been made up to date in that respect. And as you can see from the slide, the pathway requires an annual minimum reduction of 12.7% in CO2 emissions, starting immediately. Just some facts about transport emissions nationwide. 34% of all UK emissions in 2018 are from transport, and that's up from 21%, largely because of the reduction in other areas. It means it's a larger proportion. And there's been no net reduction in carbon for transport since 1990. So it really has been a tough nut to crack. And even if we stop solar, petrol and diesel by 2030, we need to reduce coal miles by about 20% to achieve our net zero target. And I'll put here for reference a presentation given by Professor Gillian Enable on reducing carbon emissions, which he gave to our climate assembly, which is on YouTube if anyone wants to look at that in more detail. In terms of the council's contribution to those emissions, they only make 2% of the city's total. So really, it shows that whether it's the dust cuts, all of the council's vehicles fleet added together, we have only direct control over a relatively small proportion of that, and it shows the importance of engagement with members of the public, etc., and our contractors, all of which it's important to share our goal of being net carbon neutral by 2030. One example of that is the enforcement contract, which I manage. That's a relatively low carbon contract. Lots of people walking around on foot, and the vehicles. You've got obviously bicycles. We've now got electric bicycles. The cars are all electric, but there are some vehicles like removal trucks where there isn't an electric equivalent at the moment. There aren't any. So that's one example of a contract where we're asking everybody to let us know how they're going to meet the 2030 target. And this is sort of a snapshot of where we are as a city. We have 35,000 diesel vehicles, 60,000 petrol vehicles, 1,500 electric, and as we go up, obviously there are much fewer carbon emissions as a result of that particular. For example, ideally, active travel has pretty much zero carbon emissions. Just starting from the bottom, I think it's interesting to note in terms of, although I'm talking about carbon here, and you could reverse, diesel actually emits less carbon than petrol. And back in 2005, the City Council actually gave a discount to on permits for diesel vehicles on those grounds, because you get less CO2 per kilometre for diesel vehicles. Obviously, later on, the NOx emissions that are identified from diesel vehicles in terms of air quality have become more problematic, and now it's actually the reverse. We have a surcharge for diesel vehicles and a discount for electric vehicles. But obviously, we can't just convert 90, 100,000 vehicles into electric to get to where we need to be. One of the key areas is if somebody swaps a petrol vehicle for public transport, there is an even greater gain in terms of carbon. Or somebody from a diesel vehicle swaps that for a car club vehicle, then again the costs of producing the car in terms of carbon are much reduced. So overall, Brighton and Hove does compare favourably with many cities, particularly in the southeast. With a third of households don't own a car, and that compares to a quarter nationally. We have 171 bus journeys per head annually. That's one of the highest per capita bus use outside of London. And work to make sure that the public transport system is ideally, well, the target is to be zero emissions by public transport. Obviously, it improves the credentials of those at the top of at the top of that chart. The same with car clubs. Swapping those car club vehicles to electric improves them. I've included car clubs there because although it's a small number, 120 car club vehicles will represent about 2,000 people who've potentially given up a car, used a car club instead for their day-to-day, for whenever they need it to go shopping or whatever. So it is an important part of the picture in terms of shared ownership, and increased active travel is really important going forward. Although we're talking about carbon, air quality is an issue in Brighton and Hove. We have an air quality management area, and if you extrapolate the figures from the World Health Organization, it means that 175 people per year die prematurely from the air quality that they breathe in the city. So there are significant benefits in terms of moving to electric vehicles in addressing that particular issue as well. So are electric vehicles the answer? Well, electric vehicles do require on average about 50% more carbon to reduce than conventional vehicles. There's lots of information on YouTube in terms of the sort of environmental benefits of conventional versus electric vehicles. On average, depending on the weight of the vehicle, how much it's used, etc., it can take 1.5 to 3 years before that you have a net carbon benefit because obviously there are fewer emissions going forward, and obviously the continual reduction in the power grid emissions, which we expect to continue, bring that date forward, going forward. To note, hybrid vehicles do have heavy engines as well as batteries, so they're not quite. They can take longer to become net carbon neutral, but have benefits in terms of compared to internal combustion engine vehicles. There are widely reported issues in terms of raw materials, cobalt, lithium, but overall progress. This is an area that really is being focused on in terms of Faraday challenges and trying to get a greener batteries going forward, reduce the amount of cobalt, lithium, reduce the amount of power, or make the power the factories by renewable energy going forward. So this is an area of concern, but an area where there's a lot of focus in trying to make electric vehicles as green as possible. And although there are zero tailpipe emissions for electric vehicles, there are still particulates are still an issue potentially from brakes and tyres, although regenerative braking can reduce those. So our first our journey so far in Brighton and Hove, we first installed 4 electric charge points in Brighton and Hove in 2009 with some European Civitas funding, followed by another 4 shortly afterwards. It was very much ahead of the curve in terms of there weren't any regulations that protected those bays. There wasn't any contravention, so people had to register in advance. It wasn't ideal. Obviously, if somebody's coming down from London, they'd had to register that they want with our car club down here, our electric vehicle scheme in advance and getting their electric vehicle permit. There are only 18 electric vehicle permits by 1011, and that's despite offering free electricity and free parking. But by 2015, there were about 50 electric vehicles. But it's then that they introduced legislation that of parking electric vehicle charging point without charging, and the Office of Zero Emissions started issuing grants for electric vehicles. It's then that we put in our first bids for our lamppost chargers. Initially, I think the bids was for a maximum of 50 per local authority, but we put in an ambitious bid for 200 of them 3 or 4 years ago. The advantage of the lamppost chargers is they're relatively inexpensive, and they're convenient for residents in areas with no off-street parking, exactly the type of street that I showed at the beginning of the talk. Our experience is that they've been very well used, and particularly because of their convenience. People come home from work, they can plug in, and by the time they're ready for work the next morning, they're fully charged. We did get some criticism initially because they are slow charging, but I say they continue to grow and grow in their usage. We did put them in immediately in residence bays, etc., without converting them to electric vehicle recharging only. That was partly because we thought if we convert all 200 at once, they'll just be empty because the number of electric vehicles needed to catch up with the charging infrastructure. But they have been very much demand-led. People have requested them, and we've tried to very much put them in, install them in areas in their street or the next street along, so that they're following the demand. Although we have got 26 parking zones, and so we wanted at least 1 in each parking zone. As I mentioned, they're slow. In terms of the lampposts themselves, we've got 1,800 lampposts in Brighton and Hove, and we've completed a survey of all of them, and only 600 of them are suitable for chargers. That's partly because some of them are at the back of the path, or they're cast iron, they're not the right type of lamppost, or they're heritage lampposts, or then they're sort of positioned by double yellow lines, they're not in the right space. So we do sometimes put in supplementary posts nearby where it's not always possible to put them in. But yeah, that's we're looking to, as I say, add another 50 going forward. These are our fast chargers. We initially started with 7 kilowatts, which take 5 to 6 hours to get a full charge. More recently, the bids have been for 22 kilowatt, which take 2 hours to charge. They've been very useful in destination as destination chargers, sort of where people go shopping for a short period of time. They can just plug in, and then by the time they finish their shopping, they're fully charged. One thing that was raised by some groups, such as Living Streets, was that we are taking up pavement space by putting them on the pathway. So going forward, our councillors have said that where possible, in terms of the fast and rapid chargers, we'll always put them in the carriageway. We'll do a little build out and make sure that they're on street rather than reducing the pavement width. I just want to talk now about sort of the engagement that we've carried out with our taxi drivers, partly to find out where to put the taxi infrastructure. Unlike the other more demand-led ones, we wanted to understand what the concerns were about converting to electric. Taxis are obviously very different. They can't use lamppost chargers. They can't even use fast chargers. Sometimes you've got multiple drivers driving the same taxi. So rapid chargers were the only option really for the taxi fleet. And we first started talking to them in December 2017, carried out a survey and offered them telematics, which goes in the cab and then tells them information about where they stopped, put their personal information about how much they would save individually, were they to switch to electric, etc. And we also have an e-taxi newsletter. First question we asked them was, where do you keep your vehicle overnight? And that revealed that only 32% of people, of taxi drivers, kept theirs on a driveway and therefore could have had their own charging infrastructure. The rest pretty much were parking on streets and therefore would need to use the public network. We asked them what the biggest issue was, what prevented them from purchasing an electric vehicle. This was in 2018, and it would be interesting to do the survey again now, because the number one reason was there are not enough charge places to charge. We now have 3 rapid charging hubs, with the 4th that will be capable of charging 500 vehicles a day, more than enough for the 1,500 licensed taxis in the city. Second reason they mentioned is electric vehicles cannot drive far enough on a single charge. All of these matter we tried to look at by the telematics. So we got the data on, which is the telematics data on where they stopped, how long they stopped for, where they were taking their breaks, because we were trying to make it fit it in with their daily schedule. So it wouldn't be, it was a convenient area to park with amenities nearby where they could get some lunch and close to a nice cafe, etc. going forward. What the telematics showed us was that out of 2,116 trips, only 8 of those trips would have required a top up during that fare, which was obviously significantly less than I think many of them thought. And then out of those stops, 103 of them stopped between 15 and 45 minutes, during which time they could have had a rapid charge. This was again back in 2018, but the annualized savings were £2,045 annually. And then we worked out what the saving would be if 1%, 10%, 50% of the fleet were converted to electric vehicles. And we installed our first rapid charging hubs in July of last year, and that's a picture of one of them there. And one thing I would mention is in terms of the charger types and connections, there is regulation on this. Type 2 are our lamppost AC, and there are our lamppost chargers and our fast chargers. When it comes to rapid chargers, you get CCS connections and the shadow mode connections, which are both direct connect, the DC. They're mainly for Nissan Leafs, but for direct chargers you have both. But if you plug a Type 2 charger into a rapid, you only get 22 kilowatts of power out, because it's alternating current rather than DC. So for these, we are looking to sort of keep them to a maximum 1 hour stay. So going forward, we'll probably only have a CCS and shadow mode connection types, because they're the fastest at the end of the day, and we do have lots of slower Type 2 chargers available. Just in terms of where we are now, in terms of the split between the different types of chargers, the light blue section at the bottom is our fast chargers, and that shows how much is year on year, and they've grown in terms of kilowatt hours are used. The blue ones are our lamppost chargers, which can continue to grow. With the introduction of the rapid charge, I think we've seen a slight reduction in fast chargers with a preference to the rapids, but that's the current split. Moving on to some of the challenges we've faced in terms of leading by example, converting our own fleet to electric. The challenge with that is that the council does own and operate a huge range of very specialist vehicles, refuse trucks being one of them. This is a picture of the council's first electric refuse truck. We now have 4 of those. I must say, anecdotally, the drivers of the trucks are very it's very, very in favour of really notice the difference, should we say. And I think some drivers under a normal day, they come back with headaches with the fuel, the noise, everything of operating a refuse truck, and operating an electric one is a very, very different in terms of the day-to-day operation of it. But there's a need for electric street sweepers, lorries, beach buggies for our lifeguards on Brighton Beach, a whole range of specialist vehicles that there's a challenge in getting. Not everything's there just now. And it's expensive to upgrade the substations. We needed for the depot it was cost 250,000 to upgrade the substation to get enough power to the substation to enable these to charge overnight. We do have a plan in place to convert all council vehicles by the end of the decade to zero emissions. And one of the things we're working out with our housing repairs team as part of Innovate UK funded project is a trial is for people who own fleet vehicles but haven't got an option of charging at home, such as in the street at the beginning of the talk. So it's looking at how they can book a lamppost charger on a Monday, Wednesday, and then that's theirs. And we've got a special dispensation of the Department for Transport for a pre-booked only charging sign. And we do see that as an area of growth as more and more fleets convert to electric. It's how those people at home are able to charge their vehicles using the public network. Next page is a picture of our sort of bubble chart with the largest bubbles showing the lamppost chargers with the greatest amount of use. When we put them in, there are fewer restrictions on lamppost chargers. When we're talking to UK Power Networks, we can put them in as long as we don't put 2 or 3 on the same side of the street. We're pretty much okay in terms of grid capacity. But in practice, when we're looking at when people plug in, so if it's a bit small on the left-hand side, but the 2 big bars on that chart are people plugging in at between 4 and 6 p.m. and 6 and 8 p.m. and that represents nearly 40% of people charging. So peak time on the grid is between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. and we've got lots of people plugging in at that time. So how we're looking at trying to not add to grid capacity at peak times is sending people a notification so that when they do plug in, they ask them, are they happy to delay their charge until 7 p.m. And if they press yes, then it will start the charge at 7 p.m. For most people charging over using a lamppost charger, by the time they need the vehicle at 8 p.m, that won't be a problem. Obviously, it's a choice at the moment. People, we're just asking if they want to avoid peak time, and if they do, they can press yes or no. All of our chargers are capable of load balancing. That means that in our case, UK Power Networks can send a message to any of the chargers asking them to reduce the amount of output to deal with peak times. But we're very conscious as we're going through and adding lamppost charge, fast chargers, etc., that we are picking out areas with spare capacity in terms of the substation. And the next person who comes along would potentially, who needs to sort of expand the network, would have to pay for an expensive substation upgrade. And the sites going forward for rapid chargers is limited. Before we were looking at rapid charging hubs, we had 350 kilowatt chargers, so that's 150 kilowatts. We're now looking at single sites, just to because they're more plentiful than the other one. But it's an issue that central government's looking at and power companies in terms of significant investment in the grid infrastructure. Another challenge that we face in Brighton and Hove is that we're not just charging for our residents, but for all of the major events that we have within the city throughout the year. We've just had Brighton Marathon a couple of weeks ago, and we've got a population of 300,000. And Pride over the weekend, you get the population would double, another 300,000 people on top of that. So you come down to many of them from London or other places with electric vehicles who need to charge. We did look at things like the example here of this sort of large batteries that are portable. and that you can put down at close to various sites, as well as hydrogen fuel cells. The difficulty with both of those we found is that you've got a limited amount of extra capacity. As you can see there, that one just creates another 2 charge points or 4 bays. Plus, there are potential issues with transporting those heavy batteries, and which can, on occasions, be from diesel, which isn't ideal in terms of the. It's not entirely 100% renewable, and we have, as a city's council, signed up to the Oxford Charter, which means that 100% of renewable, 100% of electricity on the public network is paid for by renewable tariffs. So instead, we're looking at flexible chargers like the one down here, which has multiple sockets. So one 22 kilowatts charger can provide sort of charge for up to 4 vehicles being plugged in, and again, bookable bays. And we know a lot of our visitors actually stay with relatives and family in Brighton and Hove. So we've got lots more sort of bays, and having a bookable system would make the most efficient use of the charge points that we do have. Some of the other challenges we have are non-electric vehicles blocking chargers. For that, we're looking to introduce bay sensors, which identify if there's a vehicle parked over it but nothing charging. That links to our back office enforcement officers, so they can come out and issue a penalty charge notice if that happens, because it is an valuable and an important infrastructure, and we do obviously want to keep it for the use of electric vehicles only. Another problem is electric vehicles overstaying. We get more and more complaints about this, people parking plugged in and charged for longer than is necessary. So we are issuing notifications to drivers who use the app, and then saying that your vehicle should be charged. And then there is potentially sort of an option of charging people if they do, for example, park at a rapid charger for a long period of time. I should mention the green bays, which again we're using to try to engineer out any possible error on the part of drivers who might not see the signs or anything else, and make it really clear that they are for electric vehicle charging only. And as I mentioned, sort of managing demand by bookable bays. Another challenge which we want to get really right from the start is the accessible charging network. We've been fortunate in getting some Innovate UK funding, working with our partners Disabled Motoring UK, to look at the issue of accessibility. And they've provided a full insight of all our different types of chargers, and provided some really valuable insights and feedback on the physical infrastructure, the layout, and what a blue badge holder or driver would need to know before they arrive at a destination, such as, does it have a drop curb, the slope gradients, the type of charger. I mean, it's clear when you're looking at the big chargers, often some blue badge holders, when they go to a petrol station, it might ask for assistance in sort of handling the pump. We've been looking at how we might provide that assistance via civil enforcement officers, etc. If somebody does need to use a rapid, how we might be able to provide that assistance by some sort of booking system. But obviously, this is, as I say, very important to get right from the start. And there's no point putting in chargers and then they're not the right height, and then having to expensively to refit them. Building a reliable network is certainly a challenge. Here's a picture of a road traffic collision that unfortunately we had just before, despite the bollards that we have in place to prevent that. There we have graffiti is an ongoing problem with any street furniture in the city. That's why we've provided when we first put them in, they were just blank boxes, and we found they were tagged all the time, etc. But now we have they've wrapped, and that's actually prevented, stopped people from putting graffiti on them, because there is a design on them. And there are many points of failure, unfortunately. And this is where we've got a really sharp learning curve in trying to address some of these issues with app or the communications between the charge point and the system in terms of payments. I've added their poor sales after support. We have had people contacting us saying your chargers don't work, etc. Who've just bought an electric vehicle, and then we've gone to see them, and it turns out that they haven't been told by the dealership that they have to lock their vehicle before the vehicle will start charging, or basics like that, where they're so yes, after sales support in terms of electric vehicles is very important in terms of the customer experience going forward. Another challenge, and the key one, is how we the growth of electric vehicles within the city. We can't be sure exactly how many of those people in those street will switch from electric vehicles and at what rate. We've got lots of estimates on our figures, and we estimate we need approximately to provide charging for 20,000 vehicles in the city with no off-street parking, and that's what we're aiming for between now and 2030. The Office for Zero Emission Vehicles is reducing the subsidies gradually as more electric vehicles are produced and more people have electric vehicles. It is obviously more commercially viable to install charge points, and the council got a role to play in terms of planning policies through talking to through requirements for any new car parks to have at least a minimum of 10% bays with charge points, and a further 10% with adapting and everything ready for those charge points to be installed. We are working very hard to provide a public network, but equally important, particularly as that uptake increases, will be the private network and how we can encourage investment in charge points going forward. So looking forward, we are looking to, as I mentioned, to encourage investment in rapid chargers, potentially fully funded without subsidies, as more and more electric vehicles become the norm. And we're also looking to identify a site close to the A27, suitable for a rapid charging station. That was approved by committee recently. Here's an example of one in Oxford with solar panels on it. So a similar thing to that we're looking to introduce. As I mentioned previously, car clubs, electrification of that fleet is important. That's 120 potentially charge points that we'd need to electrify the fleet. And we're also working on the installation of a 150 kilowatt charger for bus charging as well. So finally, we're not working in isolation. We are working with our partners in West and East Sussex, Kent and Surrey, as well as regionally the NHS, to make a joined up charging network, and also as an informal sort of self-help group so we can share knowledge of some of the issues that can crop up. Our universities are really important, and we're working with Brighton University on electric mobility micro mobility hubs. So that's e-scooter potentially, or e-motorbikes, other types of vehicles that need charging. Brighton bike share bikes, electric ones of those. And a really important area for us is feedback from local EV drivers. We're fortunate to have electricbrighton.com, which has about 500 electric vehicle subscribers. They do an annual survey, provide us with valuable feedback on our electric charging infrastructure. Going forward, I mean, things that we used to think about in terms of where are we going in the right direction are still valid, I think, today. We were thinking about this 4 or 5 years ago in terms of, is the future battery swapping? It certainly seems to be big in some parts of China for buses, where you get an empty battery, swap it over for a fully charged one. Is the future semiconductive charging? We're thinking the same for where this is where you've got a charger built into the street. So we were thinking, well, will buses in the future, bus stops have semiconductive chargers underneath them, or taxi ranks? But who knows what the future will bring? At the moment, it's certain that we will need more charge points going forward. But what we're hoping to do is Brighton and Hove has a wind farm 12 miles off the shore, and there are plans to double that. At the moment, it can power 350,000 homes, and I say there are plans to double that. But will we be powering our our private and public transport systems by wind, by a renewable source of electricity through a variety of different charge points, conveniently located throughout the city. Thank you very much, and I'd welcome any questions you've got.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. I found that very, very fascinating. Yes, we've got a lot of questions. I've got at least 21 up on the schedule at the moment. Some of them were actually covered by your talk, but let's get going. Do we know the percentage, this is from Greg, percentage of the number of car households and people that walk to work compared to the UK average? I'm assuming that's for Brighton.
Yes, I think it was in my slide. We had 26% walk and cycle to work. That's the sort of top level of that sort of hierarchy slide. So in Brighton and Hove, yes, it's 20% of people. Obviously, it's a relatively compact city, but yes, 26% currently walk or cycle, and there are lots of initiatives to encourage that number to increase. We even recently started a Park Active scheme where people can drive, rather than driving to the city centre, they park in outer car parks, and then they're signposted to to walking routes or thoroughfares, or to cycle lanes to continue their journey into the city centre by active travel. Yeah.
Okay, so a question from Neil Broadbent. How much collaboration have you had with the distribution network operators to help increase the demand in electrical supply? And have you had much resistance to this?
Yes, I know we've worked very closely with UK Power Networks, and particularly we've had a number of joint projects that we work together on, such as UK Power Networks Enable project, which is all about accessible charge points. So we found out separately that we're working on a similar type of thing. So we've worked together jointly on that. Yes, we've fed back to their business plan, which is recently published, whereby they're looking to appoint, I think it's 18 local area energy planning officers, who we're looking forward to working with, because the higher level, we do have some with the conversations we've had, that higher level information about where there is capacity, which substations do have capacity within the city is absolutely key for us to find out and know where we can place the charge points, and again, say whether it's for the lamppost chargers, knowing where we can put them, where there's capacity, where there's not, and lots of central Brighton, unfortunately there isn't, but it is a constantly evolving picture as new developments go in. They will get substation upgrades, and then sometimes we can go in on the back of those. So we do work very closely with UK Power Next, and we think that those connections are absolutely key going forward.
Okay, political question here. What is your opinion on Jacob Rees-Mogg calling people back to council offices? This will undoubtedly increase road travel and emissions.
Yes, as a council officer, I don't need to be too political, but I would say that there's a huge opportunity in terms of, obviously, the pandemic has completely changed the way we work, and when we're talking about particularly the opportunities in terms of increasing, going up towards active travel, in terms of particularly car clubs, people who aren't commuting in every day might think more positively, or might think that actually it's an opportunity for them to not instead of purchasing another vehicle, move to a more shared ownership mode and use a car club, because they aren't commuting in every day, and for the rare only the occasions where they do need to go down to the tip, or have some that use a car club vehicle, rather than actually keeping their vehicle that they used to commute with. So I wouldn't like to sort of comment too much politically, but yes, the pandemic has obviously radically changed the way we think of transport, and there are some opportunities there that in terms of active travel, and we've all seen what the city was like during lockdown as well.
Yeah, question from Jamie. How do you mitigate risk of people tripping over charger cables and claiming against the council?
Yes, I mean, this is a very interesting. I was going to include a slide. One of the options in that first street that I showed. We have had a lot of, in terms of our inbox, people who've asked, can I run a cable from my house to their where they park? And the issue, and people have, and we do get lots of complaints. Sometimes people put a cable raised sort of cable tie over the pavement. Obviously, from an accessibility point of view, we've had complaints from wheelchair users that if you take that forward 5-10 years, and you've got raised cables after each car, it becomes impossible to walk across the pavement. So along with many London councils, we've said that isn't, there are also health and safety issues in terms of moving cables large, because you don't always, certainly in Brighton and Hove, it's quite rare that you actually get a space outside your house. So it isn't, it really isn't, I mean, you're lucky to get one in your street normally. So it isn't, because it isn't you can't consistently park outside your street. We don't see it as a potential going forward. We have also unfortunately seen people do sort of run them from top windows, wrap them around a lamppost, and then park on double yellow lines outside their house as well. So that there are lots of potential issues with trailing cables in terms of running from the house across the pavement. I think possibly you might have meant trailing cables from the lamppost charger to the vehicle, and yes, that we do have sort of a please beware, and please make sure you don't sort of create a trip hazard. We've issued those sort of warning notices to our enforcement officers, and where they do see that happening, we have been placing notices just to remind people to keep their cables tidy as far as they possibly can. Yes, I mean, it's with the lamppost chargers that you say to get that, and with the rapid chargers and the fast chargers now, they're built out onto the road, and therefore it's less of an issue, but certainly something we keep an eye on going forward. And yes, we're seeing how the situation evolves. But I say, considering there are now thousands of people using them, I think we haven't had too many reports of any trips or falls as a result, fortunately. But we'll continue to watch the situation.
A good question here from Nick Binks. I've heard that Brighton and Hove City Council was part of a hydrogen bus vehicle trial due to issues with electrical vehicles not being too reliable. Is this the case? How is the trial going?
Well, I mean, they certainly are looking at hydrogen, and I mean, at the moment, the closest hydrogen depot is at Gatwick from us, and so they are looking at the possibility of investing in hydrogen buses. I would say at the moment they've got 58 hybrid buses. I know they're working locally with Ricardo's, sort of an engineering company, on getting the most out of those hybrid buses, looking at the geofencing, looking at how they operate. I'm not aware that they have particular. I mean, as I say, they've just invested further in hybrid buses. In terms of their long-term strategy, I'm aware they want to be zero emissions by 2030. My understanding is that does involve some hybrid buses, but yes, I can't speak directly for the bus company. And there are other bus operators that, as say, like Big Lemon in Brighton and Hove, that are looking to increase their fleet of electric, and for those we're putting in the 150 kilowatt rapid chargers.
Okay, I'm going to ask this question. I don't know what it means. Have you considered V2G?
Yes, yeah. V2,
Can you tell me what it means first?
Yes, V2G is vehicle to grid.
Okay.
Vehicle to grid is something that mainly applies to, at the moment, to home charging. I mean, you have to, it's right at the cutting edge. I mean, it's basically feeding energy from the battery back into to the grid at peak times. So people would pay, in terms of their home charging, for example, a tariff which would be reduced if the grid was allowed to sort of take the electricity that was stored in the battery back, and to deal with peak demand if the wind's not blowing. And so that has, particularly in terms of home charging, does have a significant potential if people want to sign up for those particular tariffs that would allow a two-way flow of energy. In terms of the public charging infrastructure, if people are plugging in, other than what I was sort of talking about in terms of delaying the initial start time of charging, we wouldn't really be looking to take their energy out of their batteries, because if they're public in we've assumed that they want the charging to be in one direction and not backwards and forwards. But yes, certainly in terms of reduced rate tariffs for home charging, you can see where that could really help smooth out the peaks and troughs of demand for energy going forward. And it'll be an interesting area to keep an eye on, certainly.
Okay, a question from Adrian Brown. Will you seek to reduce brake and tyre wear by reducing speed limits and hence less emissions as well from ICE vehicles?
Well, yes, we do have quite a large area. Proportion of Brighton and Hove is already 20 miles an hour. Certainly most of the residential areas. There are new projects, sort of Liverpool city projects, where they're looking at all sorts of measures related to speed control. So the 20-mile-an-hour speed restrictions were over significant parts of the city were reduced quite some time ago with exactly that objective in mind, and certainly close to schools and other areas. So that they are largely in place in terms of speed restrictions.
Okay, thank you. I think you've already answered this. Lampposts normally take less than 100 watts for a lamp. Are there issues with taking 2 kilowatts? How many can you install in a street?
Yes, I mean, we sometimes have on occasions installed two on one side of the street, and one on the other, because they tend to come from separate feeders. So, yes, generally speaking, it's the benefit with lamppost chargers is you have got the choice on where you can put them. And as I say, we've been really impressed with in terms of the convenience, how well they're being used. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
I've got a very strange noise coming through on my speakers. I don't know if you got the same thing or not. No, it's gone now. Okay. Someone said, I do think it will, Nigel Jones, I do think it will be important to have overstay fees, in particular for rapids.
Yes, this is something we're just recently looking at, and we're looking at many of the other charge point operators that are operating rapids and ultra rapids do have they charge £10 per hour. So after you've reached that, it is an incredibly expensive infrastructure, and allowing for fair use when you do have people queuing to use them is, as you say, I would agree. I mean, it is. It's obviously important to make sure that anybody using that charge point is aware of that through signage and clear indications that there will be a fee if they don't come back. We're also talking, similar to penalty charge notices, that if people are penalised, say £10 per hour, that they do have the opportunity to appeal against that. So there might have been circumstances beyond their control, which meant they couldn't get back to the charger. So there does need to be an appeal system, some sort of a human sort of assessment of that if needed. But yes, I mean, to make sure they're used efficiently, Sometimes well-notified penalties for overstaying will be needed.
Yes, thank you. Question from Adrian Brown. Why do you need an app to pay for a charge rather than contactless payment using a phone or credit debit cards?
Yeah, well, you can carry on. We can do have contactless. We actually installed them. It's taken a bit of a while to install all the fast and rapid charge. We'll have do have contactless. And then there is in terms of notifying people of an overstay, things like that. We just talked about. Obviously, they don't get the app notification to let people know. Straight over. Can you hear
I've got
me?
some I've got some really strange things happening on the sound. Have you got the same, Leslie?
Yes, it's the same, and I think the audiences are also experiencing the same issue.
Paul, can you try anything you can do on your? It's when you start talking.
Can you hear me now?
As soon as you start talking, it goes funny.
Oh, right.
Unfortunately, we got through most of your talk. Well, you got through your whole talk before it started to.
Okay, is that any better?
No,
Is that any better?
nope.
Oh, that's right.
Sorry if the technical problems have forced us to end this meeting a little bit earlier than we'd hoped, and not had the chance to answer all the questions. I'd like to thank Paul for what has been a very interesting talk, and I really regret that we've still got 28 unanswered questions. According to the IET assistance, we can actually get hold of these questions, and so we can look at them and answer the ones, some of them only directly to the individuals. But thank you everybody for joining in. Thank you, Paul, for giving the presentation. Sorry it didn't go quite as smoothly as it could have done, but perhaps you can come back again next year and give a follow-up. Thank you. And just to remind everybody that our next meeting will be a hybrid meeting, i.e. both present and online. Thank you very much. If people want to log off, I'm going to let Paul look through the chat because there's some nice comments in the chat.